This is Starting Point, a podcast that tracks Guyana's unprecedented growth from all vantage points. Join your hosts, Kiana Wilberg and Fariza Hanif, as they dive deep into the heart of topical issues.
Hi there. Welcome to this week's episode of Starting Point, the Oil and Gas Edition. I am your host, Kiana Wilberg, and today we place the spotlight on the role of the private sector in Guyana's flourishing economy. To help us with this discussion is the chairman of the Private Sector Commission, Captain Gerald Gouveia Jr. Mr. Gouveia, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me. Very excited for the conversation today.
As am I. So, as the name suggests, Captain Gerald Gouveia, you're a pilot.
I am.
How did you move from being a pilot to chairman of the Private Sector Commission? I want to get that backstory before we head into our questions.
Sure. I mean, it's actually one of my favorite stories to tell in the sense that, aviation is in my blood. My mom's a pilot, my dad's a pilot, my brother's a pilot, my wife's a pilot.
A whole generation.
A whole generation of pilots. So, I was lucky enough to grow up in aviation. My dad being a military pilot, my mom being Guyana's first female captain. It's almost, ingrained in your psyche. And I remember when I was very young, 8, 9 years old, my brother and I, my parents would go off into the middle of the night to go save a life, a pregnant woman, a snake bite victim, or whatever. And at the time, Ogle Airport wasn't what it is today, so it had no lights. And I remember being very young and at the back of a pickup truck, basically, and we used to drive down the runway putting portable lights down for my parents to land to save a life. So that kind of stuck with you. And then, after high school, I went to university in Toronto, and then I spent some time in the Canadian Forces, about 8 years, and then I, trained to be a pilot. So it only became natural for me to come back to Guyana after my military service in 2015 and, kind of get involved in the family business. So I was lucky enough to really see the length and breadth of Guyana as a pilot, and then that really changed my perspective on things. When you fly in Guyana, you really start to learn the communities that you fly to. You're not just flying from JFK to Toronto. You're flying thousands of people. No, you're flying 5 people. You're getting to know the families that you're going to, whether it's in Camarang or Lethem or Madia, it doesn't matter. So you really start to get a big sense of community involvement and impact on the community, whether that's doing night medevacs in the middle of the night or doing flood relief in the Rupununi, landing on grass strips to take food and water to people and stuff like that. So it really became ingrained in me personally that you have to give back. Aside from that, my dad has spent a lifetime not only being an aviation professional, but being a leader here in the private sector. Coincidentally, Roraima was started in 1992, and the Private Sector Commission was started in 1992. So, as he was coming up in his professional career, building his aviation company along with my mom, he was also rising in the ranks of the Tourism and Hospitality Association of Guyana, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, and then eventually the Private Sector Commission as chairman. And what that showed us as young people is that, a rising tide floats all boats. So just because the company is doing well and our family is progressing and so on, we have to give back. We have to make sure the business community continues to grow and that the community that we're in also benefits from our work. So I think it was almost a natural progression for me as I settled into Guyana that I started to work with the Chamber of Commerce, started to work with TAG, and now eventually here I am as the chairman of the Private Sector Commission.
Now, before we get to your role as chairman of the Private Sector Commission, you said that you alluded rather, to falling in love with some of the communities, getting to know them. Do you have a favorite? And as you tell us about your favorite, you noted that you're helping out with the family business, taking that over and pouring your energies into that. But is there any particular experience since you're back that really resonated with you as a pilot and being part of the family business?
Yeah, the very interesting part of our family business is the fact that it's very diverse. We have operations at Chetty Jagat International Airport where we're going to be doing things like handling large military transports for the U.S. military, to executive jets for KES, or we would be doing, night medevac missions. For example, the unfortunate Madia fire. I was fortunate enough to have been called, and myself and my director of operations, Captain Larry Barkley, answered that call, and we went into Madia at 2 o'clock in the morning to help save as many girls as we can that tragic night. I was involved in many search and rescues, not many, but quite a few search and rescues in the last 10 years that I was here. As recent as the gentleman who went overboard from that cement ship, and I was part of the team that helped find him. So, we have a lot of very interesting stories. I would say that, every day is an adventure here in Guyana. Every day is an adventure at Roraima. And I've done those things. I've also been Kung Fu Panda for children during Halloween. So I've really had a fantastic experience growing up. Every year we do the Christmas party for the children at Santa Mission. I dress up like Santa Claus. I run around the beach and, have children catch me. So it really has a very varied experience here in the company. But I got to say that those night medevacs, especially when it's a young kid who has a snake bite or a motor vehicle accident or a baby in respiratory distress, when you do those and you see the direct impact that you have on those communities, those are the things that keep you going and keep you motivated. And
do you have a favorite community?
I do. A lot of people are going to get upset, but the Rupununi has a very special place in my heart. And specifically the small village of Anai in the northern Rupununi. I just love the views from Anai. But really anywhere in the Rupununi is beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that backstory there. I think our audience really learned quite a lot. One being is that what's ingrained in you is giving back to your country and helping to build our people. And I want to use that as our segue into talking about the work of the Private Sector Commission. And you noted it's been around since 1992, over 3 decades. So this institution has passed through many phases of Guyana's development. The phase that we're in now, we constantly hear the term unprecedented growth, the era of transformation. So the private sector has to respond in a way that's more than just moving the needle of growth. It's a completely different period. How do you feel about sitting at the helm of the Private Sector Commission at such a time of our country's history?
I'm extremely excited. And I'm more excited in the fact that we have not just vibrant private sector. We have opportunity using technology that we can now start to empower, especially the young people, into getting involved. And I'm very proud to say things like in the private sector now, we have an overwhelming amount of SMEs, small businesses, and entrepreneurs that are joining the ranks of the private sector. So that is very exciting because you're on the cutting edge of everything. We are also very fortunate to have a government, a public sector that understands that they have a role to play in private sector development, in the sense that, we're not doing it in a silo. We need a government that understands that they have to set the framework and then get out of the way and let the private sector do the work. And I think that relationship is really starting to gain some traction, and I can start to see that, the government is laying down some challenges to the private sector, and it's exciting for me to motivate my members and their members to really answer that call. So for me, it's exciting. It really starts to engage the creative side of your brain because it's not business as usual. You have to innovate, you have to be creative and think outside the box, otherwise you're going to miss the boat, right? It's been said before, and I'm going to quote him, but His Excellency President Ali said, listen, he wants to do 30 years of work in 5, right? This is his last term. So he is upping the pace. And I'm saying the private sector is answering that call. We will keep the pace, and to do so, we need to innovate, and we need to use technology. So that's the exciting part for me.
And so what I'm getting from you is that the private sector is responding.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it goes from the very large companies as well, which really makes up the backbone of the private sector. The very large, distributing companies, the very large banks and so on. But really it's our membership, right? We have members from every regional chamber and every sectoral chamber, from the Georgetown Chamber to the Aviation Chambers to the Tourism Chambers and so on. And I can tell you, across the chambers, people are excited. And it's fantastic to be at the helm of a grouping that's like-minded, motivated, and really delivering.
So before I get to my next question, what's your membership like? How many members do you have?
So that's a very good question. So a lot of people think of the private sector as its own entity, separate and distinct from all the others. And whilst we do have a distinct identity, we are a membership of memberships in the sense that our members are the different chambers of commerce. So for example, you know, the Rupununi Chamber of Commerce is one of our members, and they have their own members. The Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, the Berbice Chamber of Commerce, the Region 3 Chamber of Commerce are all members of the private sector. You have the Aviation, the Aircraft Owners Association of Guyana is a member, Tourism Hospitality Association of Guyana, the Shipping Association, GMSA. So the point is that all of these chambers of commerce and sectoral members, as well as the very large companies, for example, like the banks DIH and the DDLs and so on, are all members. So the leaders of all of these business support organizations now sit around one table, and then they elect their leadership, which eventually will lead to me as the chairman.
So communities within communities.
Communities within communities. And that gives us reach, not only geographically across Guyana, but sectorally cross-cutting every sector in Guyana.
Now, with such a diverse membership, of course, not everyone is going to be gunning for a role in the oil and gas sector.
Correct.
And to play directly within the services that are required. You're going to have companies that will want to be in tourism, they'll want to be in health. How is your membership preparing for the explosion of opportunities that's happening as a result of what's taking place with oil and gas?
Right. So, I mean, the good news is that with the local content legislation, it really gives us the opportunity to partake in oil and gas without being in oil and gas. You're in the periphery industries around oil and gas, whether that's logistics or accommodation, etc. So there's an opportunity there for my membership. But more importantly, what we have embraced here in Guyana, and you've heard, you know, the government speak about economic diversification. But from a private sector standpoint, we're the ones who are actually doing the economic diversification. And we were highlighted actually recently in the Caribbean. They had a massive dialogue across all the Caribbean countries, and Guyana stood out as one of the most economically diverse countries despite having oil and gas. So I did a speech there, and I said that, you know, a lot of people think that Guyana is a oil and gas country, and I'm like, no, we're a country with oil and gas. So it really speaks to the fact that we're diversifying away from oil and gas, using the revenues and the benefits of oil and gas to develop our tourism industries, our agriculture industries, eventually our manufacturing industries and ICT. So we're really starting to diversify, and I think a lot of the members are taking the hint that over the years, their family businesses or their entrepreneurial ideas now have a place either in the periphery around oil and gas or in an economy that has a lot more disposable income, that has a lot more capital circulation inside, so that creates opportunity for restaurants to be opened up, creates opportunity for SMEs to do, you know, podcasts like this, right? So now we have a market that allows young people like yourself to innovate, and the market is there, and I think that we as a Guyanese people are very good at taking advantage of the opportunities when presented, and now we have a plethora of opportunities in front of us.
I'm glad you mentioned the local content legislation, and you hinted at the opportunities that it's been able to create. I mean, I've heard quite a lot from businesses as well that as a result of the law, they've been able to participate in a meaningful way. But while the law does have some carve-outs which say that oil companies 100% of the services that they may need in immigration, permits, or trucking and so forth, that they have to use Guyanese. That law was in place and making that requirement since 2021. Years later, what other industries do you think locals are ready to dominate?
Very good question. So the good news is that we're in constant dialogue with the government, and they're constantly reaching out to the private sector. In fact, right now we're going through another such phase where the Private Sector Commission and our members are now deciding and also demonstrating which industries can we be part of. What we don't want to see happen is that we say, okay, we want to do all of the undersea framework, but we don't have the ability to do it. So we have to do a measured response, and I think that we have been very mature about it thus far. So what we did when the local content legislation was first being created, I was part of that grouping that was, you know, they called us into a room, they locked the doors at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they said, we're not leaving here until we know which industries can do exactly what into what capacity, and that created the first framework. Over the years, those numbers have been tweaked very little. What started off as maybe 10% is now 20%, and some items have been added. Some items have been added unofficially as like a pilot project to see if we can actually deliver. So what I would say is that, as we start to develop the technology and the capacity, and I'm very proud to say that we've been pushing partnerships in Guyana, especially in the oil and gas sector. That we have to grow quickly. We started from exploration to production in 5 years. Most countries take 20. So in order for us to capitalize on the growth of our oil and gas sector, the private sector had to find international partners, whether that's capital, technology, or human resources, and then that really accelerated our business. So I would say we can get into a lot more things like specialized equipment in terms of transport of hazardous material, for example. We can start getting into a little bit more on the data side of things. A lot of companies are getting more data oriented. On the logistics side, there's a lot of opportunity. We already have things like, a heavy participation in things like warehousing and accommodations and offices. But now, lay down yards, the shipping side of things, the vessels and so on. These now start to become real opportunities for Guyanese as we find our international partners. So currently we're going through that process of identifying industries and identifying opportunities. And very shortly you're going to see us do our official submission to the government in terms of how we would like to expand the local content legislation.
Well, I am certainly looking forward to having you back on the podcast because we'd love to hear what are some of those recommendations to improve the law and to ensure that Guyanese have a greater role to play in the oil and gas industry.
Absolutely.
So definitely a follow-up conversation for us to have. But as we talk about local content, I want to go back to something the president has said time and again. And in addition to challenging the private sector to innovate and to do partnerships, he's also called for a change of culture.
Yep.
So I want to flesh that part out a bit. What is this culture? We often hear time and again of examples where Guyanese businesses see themselves as competitors. And we would hear this saying of the crab in a barrel mentality, trying to pull each other down. The president has challenged the private sector to move away from this.
Right.
Pool your resources. Let's start building empires together.
Absolutely.
Do you get the sense that the private sector is changing this attitude? What's your take?
Sure. So, a little bit has to do with our history. Let's say 2020, and even before. Guyana's economy was not as diverse as it is. Guyana's economy was not as big as it is. So the pie was relatively small, and you had the same players fighting for the same pieces of the same pie. What we've been able to do over the last few years is grow that pie. So now the same players are fighting for big pieces of the pie, but there's enough pie to be left over. And that's been a change in paradigm for a lot of people. So they start to realize that, hey, look, you and I can eat as much as we want of this pie, and there's still a lot of pie left over. And then we start seeing foreigners coming in and eating the leftover pie, but you and I are full. We can't physically eat any more pie. So I think that there's been a paradigm shift in a lot of Guyanese that, you know what, we got to come together, right? Because guess what? You and I could only eat so much pie, but if we bring 3 or 4 other people, we can eat a lot more pie, and therefore there's less pie for the foreigners. And that's kind of been the motivating factor is that, Guyanese people, I'm seeing a shift towards collaboration over competition. I'm seeing a shift of people coming together to take advantage of opportunities. For example, there's a fantastic consortium between the agriculture players where they're now harvesting soya and corn across the country. That's a stellar example of if you can bring Guyanese together, empires can be built. And I'm seeing that more and more and more. So what we're doing in the Private Sector Commission anyway is that we've developed a consortium framework. And I'm going around to the different industries, and I'm actually finding people who are in the housing industry or construction industry and creating mini consortiums of 4 or 5 people at a time, so that now they can now start to partake in larger projects. And we're doing that across the board. So we have about 8 of these formed already across the tourism, housing, shipping industries,
Wow.
and so on. And we're starting to build that up. This is only happening in the last few months. So you're going to start seeing us coming together, because what that does is that when you have an international partner that comes to Guyana, even the very large companies in Guyana are medium companies in the international scheme of things. So we want to make sure that when we have the international partners that are coming, we have a showing, a grouping of Guyanese that can match them in terms of effort, capital, human resources, or so on, to execute the projects here in Guyana. So I can tell you that I'm seeing a big shift away from the crabs in a bucket mentality, more so that we have to work together, because together we are better.
And I want to commend you on that effort, and thanks for making that public on our show, because one of the other examples, and one of the reasons I raised that, is because I recently had to review what's taking place in the shipping industry. And I recall this example where representatives of Monishwars as well as John Finance, they spoke about how they were competitors in the shipping industry. But because of the needs of the oil and gas industry, they put that competitive part of them aside, and they said, listen, we have to come together, pool our resources, and now they're partnering on some major projects within the shipping industry. And since I'm on the shipping industry, we've been hearing talks about the importance of a deep water harbor. How have your members been responding to the conversation and how that's going? What do they want to see?
Right. So the number one thing that we want to see is pace, right? Now, that has been the theme here in Guyana. So we know that that deep water harbor is going to be critical to unlocking Guyana's full potential, because the deep water harbor connects to the highway to Brazil, to northern Brazil. That now starts to connect the dots for Guyana to become the logistics hub for the region by allowing Brazil, northern Brazil, access to the Atlantic. And then for the foreign companies to have access to a deep water harbor here in Guyana, we don't need to transship in Trinidad. We don't need to transship in Jamaica, which will cut off days, weeks off of shipping times. It will cut down the costs and so on. So it really becomes a force multiplier in the import-export industry, as well as for our ability to now start manufacturing. Once we get the gas to shore up and running and the cost of electricity comes down, it gives us a direct access to international markets for export. You've heard also that the president is talking about boosting the agriculture sector. When we start to really get into the agro-processing and the agriculture sector, we need an outlet that we can't have sitting on the wharf in Trinidad for weeks going to UK or going to the US or so on. So this now gives us the ability to really take advantage of Guyana's true potential. So that has been a huge motivator for people, and everyone is paying attention to the Deepwater Harbor, and especially how it links to the road going to northern Brazil, because we know that the minute that those two things come online, the possibilities go limitless.
So we've spoken about the importance of collaboration. We've spoken about the importance of the local content legislation and what that's been able to do, and the Deepwater Harbor, all these different components of making the best of this era that we're in. But another important component, or intangible rather, is leadership. What's your definition of leadership as a young leader?
That's a very good question. So coming up through the military, I was fortunate to go to officer candidate school in Canada. And what they teach you is a definition of leadership that stuck with me. And my definition of leadership is motivating your people, your troops, your people, to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. So if you break that sentence down, it really captures what I find makes a good leader. So if you permit me, I'll do a little grammar exercise here.
Please, go ahead.
So if you break it down, you have motivate, right? The first thing is that you need to motivate your people, right? So you have to be a motivational person. You have to lead by example. You have to be a subject matter expert, so that when you speak to your people, you're doing it from a position that they will be motivated to work with you. The next part of that is your people. You have to take ownership of your people. They are your people, right? Their success, Their happiness, their failings, their sadness are yours, and you have to internalize that as a leader. So accountability and ownership of your people and your task, very important. To do what you want them to do, you need to have an objective, you need to have a vision, you need to have an end state. So you can't be disorganized, you have to be very focused, and you have to be very deliberate in what you do, because they want to do it. That's the tricky part. You have to create a culture that they're now doing what you want, your objective, because it is ingrained in them. They can't think of a different way to do it because there's one way to carry out this task, and it's embedded in them. So if you break that down again, motivating your people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it, that is how I define a leader. So, I want to see leaders in Guyana, and I'm seeing it already, where they're taking ownership of their people, they're taking ownership of their tasks, they're motivating their people, whether that's through financial incentives or they're getting out and working with their people. They're creating their tasks, they're creating their end result. They want to see this is where we're going to go as a company or as a people. And then lastly, they're creating the culture that is changing the mindset of what it means to be a Guyanese, right? There used to be some very negative connotations to, oh, man is Guyana, what do you expect? Now when people say man is Guyana, it's because we're talking about innovation. We're talking about economic diversification. We're talking about pace. That is starting to become, man, this is Guyana. And I love that.
How does the president measure up to your definition of a leader?
Honestly, he's one of the best leaders I've seen in a long time. And I know people are going to say, oh, you're biased and so on, but just really think about my definition of what a leader is and see if he fits the bill, right? Is he motivating? Well, he's one of the top motivating speakers that I've heard in a long, long time. He's being featured on the Time magazine as one of the top 100 people in the world. You don't get there by accident. His people, he takes ownership for Guyana. Good, bad, ugly, he takes ownership for it. You can't fault the man on that one. To do what you want them to do, he has a vision. He has clearly said, this is what I want Guyana to be. I want us to be the breadbasket of the Caribbean. I want us to be the logistics and technological hub of the Caribbean. He has set his vision because they want to do it. He is creating a culture here in Guyana, both in the public and the private sector. No excuses, show up to work, get the job done, work together, and we will all succeed. And if you it's very hard. I mean, unless you want to be a naysayer, which there's naysayers and everything. There's still people that believe the world is flat, right? So the point is that if you just measure him based on definitions of leadership, not about what you think or feel, but what is the definition of leadership? And honestly, he ticks all the boxes, at least for me.
Before I close, I started our discussion by noting that in addition to being a pilot, you're also the chairman of the Private Sector Commission, a very important advocacy body. What is your vision for leading the private sector in this era that we're in? What are some of the differences that you hope to make during your tenure?
Sure. So when I became chairman of the private sector, there was 3 pillars that I wanted to stand on. The first one was democracy. So when I became chairman, we were leading up into our 2025 elections. And when, you don't know this, but when I came back in 2015 as a young officer, the private sector had stood up its command room, observation room. And our job was to field elections observers. So I was witness to the 2015 elections, witness to the 2020 elections, and the 2020 elections stuck with me. So, and it's been...
Why is that?
It's been reported by the international community, by very well-respected international leaders, as the most blatant attempt at rigging an election and stealing a democracy that I've ever seen. And that's not me quoting, that's, very important people with a lot more letters behind their name. And what I saw as a young person was my democracy literally being taken away from me. And then the private sector and, some very select public sector people fighting to keep it and fighting to take it back. So we're very happy that democracy prevailed in 2020. So when I became chairman, democracy was a huge objective for me. So we fielded the largest amount of elections observers in Guyana from a private local organization, over 150 people across the regions in Guyana. We set up relationships with all the international communities, and we're very happy to report that we have had one of the most credible, transparent, and efficient elections, right? Within days, we had the results. including a recount. And the private sector was there the whole time. So we achieved my first objective, which was democracy. And to rally that many people geographically spread across Guyana, I'm very proud of that. And I can't thank the private sector members enough for that. After that, I have two other main ones that I want to push is international relationships. The Private Sector Commission has excellent international relationships across the globe. India, China, US, UK, the EU, CARICOM, Mexico, Brazil, and so on. And what we're doing is that we're constantly fielding people going out into these areas or actually coming back to Guyana to do so. So, I mean, we have private sector members that were just in the UK promoting Guyana. We're sending people to the EU. We have sent people to the US. We've sent people to Canada. I just came back from Barbados, so we have a very strong international presence. And we're meeting people constantly from the UAE, from India, from Spain, France, all looking to set up linkages with Guyana. So we're promoting that very hard. And the last one for me is SMEs, right? Small business development. So I'm very proud in the private sector. We've actually developed a small business support desk, right, in partnership with the IDB, where we're offering free consulting to small businesses, right? So that makes them bankable. So when they go to industry, to banks to get financing, they now have proper business plans, proper financial feasibility studies, supply chain management plans, and so on. And that's all being done for free. So a big goal of mine, and the underlying theme will be inclusivity, and making sure that the generation of wealth and opportunity is spread across Guyana's length and breadth. So we're working very closely with the regional chambers to help them develop these consortiums. For example, we have them being developed in Latem, so for the Rupununi, in Berbice, in Region 3, here in Georgetown, in the shipping industry, aviation industry. So the idea is that with these consortiums, we start to really spread the opportunities and wealth generation opportunities across Guyana, and that's my major goal as chairman.
I think you are well on your way to achieving many of those things. And before we go, you noted, and this, I promise, this is my last question.
Sure.
You noted that the Private Sector Commission, with your leadership, is doing a lot of work to help SMEs, small and medium scale businesses. But I think one of the things I want to get from you finally is your advice to those businesses, leaders, young leaders who may be watching. What advice do you have for them in terms of building a business, being successful? I can share with you one of the lessons that I learned along the way as a businesswoman is the importance of partnerships, the importance of networking, the importance of taking risk and believing in yourself. 100%. But what's your advice?
Sure. So, I mean, I was lucky enough to have entrepreneurs as parents. And one of the things that has always stuck with me is something my dad has said, is that what a person, can conceive and believe, they will achieve. So the first thing is you need to have that vision. I have some other tenets that I like to live by. And another very important thing is you always have deposits and withdrawals as you go through life. It could be you're mean to a waiter, right? That's a withdrawal. You're taking away from your people are always watching. Your reputation is your currency. So you're always making deposits in your reputation or withdrawals. And to keep that in mind, especially as a young person, people are always paying attention to you. Are you the guy who is going to go get drunk and go streaking down the road? Eventually, people are going to be like, hey, weren't you that person? Why am I going to do business with you? So if you want to be successful, keep in mind that your reputation is paramount. It is your current currency. And you only have the reputation at the end of the day. Following that is that done is sometimes a lot better than perfect, right? A lot of times we sit there and we think of this idea and we have this analysis paralysis and we don't actually do anything. And one of my favorite quotes is from a military leader, and he said, a plan that's 75% effective but done aggressively and now is always better than a 100% plan that's never executed, right? So done is sometimes just better than perfect. Do it now, make it perfect later, right? Would be my humble recommendation to a lot of the young people. And finally, one of the most important things that I want to say to the young people out there is discipline and hard work beats talent every time, right?
Yeah.
every single time. So you could be the smartest straight A student in the room. You can be the best dancer or singer or artist out there. You can be the most advanced person in computers, but if you're not willing to put in the hard work and the discipline, then it doesn't mean for anything. So my thing is get up, get the work done, right? Even on the days that you don't feel like it. Get it done, make it perfect later.
Captain Gouveia, I want to thank you for sharing your insights with us today. I know that our audience has learned quite a lot, and we, as I noted earlier, hope to have you back for a follow-up discussion on the local content legislation. So thanks again.
Of course, my pleasure. And you know, the local content legislation is dear to me because you know I was part of that team that did it, and I'm very happy to hear that we have $743 million reasons as to why it's successful.
Good note to end on. Thanks again. To our audience, thank you for staying with us. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, for more discussions on Guyana's oil and gas economy. See you soon.
Thanks for watching Starting Point. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for critical updates and exclusive content.